Welcome to the Baby Historian. We are doing another read along. In this one, I'm going to have a warning. There is a mention of animal experimentation in this book. It's very quick, but if you're a dog lover, it might be upsetting. FYI, I'll put a warning on the screen before it gets there so you can cover your ears or hug your dog or, you know. An Address to Pregnant Females by an accoucheur, which is a male midwife, member of the Royal College of Surgeons in London, Leeds, printed for the author by Davies & Co. at the Stanhope Press, Vicar Lane, and sold by Leake & Nichols, Capes, and all other booksellers. 1810. To the reader. The alarming mortality, which has been prevalent in this town and neighborhood for some months, has induced me to present this short address to the female sex. Should this feeble attempt prove in any degree beneficial or have any tendency to induce females to adopt those means which are most likely to be productive of health during pregnancy, and should it be one mean of preventing disease after delivery, I shall feel myself amply repaid. Great is the consolation afforded to a medical man in his leisure hours when he calls to mind the many maladies which have come under his care, and in which the all-wise Creator has been pleased to use him as an instrument of good, in reproving and correcting the deadly poison of disease. I am well convinced that the present mode of living is one grand cause of the fatal malady which has lately laid many of our friends in the silent dust. Pregnancy, though not a disease, is frequently rendered one by inattention, irregularity, and imprudence. Whether the disease, which at present is so fatal, is of an infectious nature or not, remains yet undetermined by medical men. There is a diversity of opinions respecting this point. As it cannot be clearly ascertained, let us leave it at present, and dwell more particularly on those means by which may remove the seeds of many diseases subsequent to childbirth. An address, etc., on food. On the proper choice and use of food our health greatly depends, but it more particularly becomes a matter of the first importance when the female is anxiously looking forward to that hour when her strength is so necessary and her health so valuable. The people in this country are too partial to animal food, on which account we are frequently consulted on indigestion and the many diseases of which this partiality is the chief cause. Animal food, I allow, was designed for man, and may be moderately enjoyed without being any source of injury, but this is more likely to be the result if a certain portion of vegetables accompany it. To eat greedily of flesh meat 2 or 3 times in a day is always very improper, and pernicious to health. If the pregnant female would attend to my instructions, she would partake of flesh meat once in 24 hours, and that one indulgence should consist only of one kind. It is a matter of the first moment that the digestive organs be preserved in an active and healthy state, because the loss of power in them will hinder the body from receiving the necessary supply of new blood produced from the food in the stomach by the action of those organs upon it. In consequence of the interruption of this process, the strength of the system is every hour decreasing, without any source being open from which it can receive the needful supply. The heat as well as the weight of animal food is an enemy which impairs, if not destroys, the vigorous efforts of digestion. Vegetable aliment, on the contrary, is productive of the best effects, for it never too much descends the vessels nor injuriously overloads the system. I therefore conclude these preliminary remarks by observing that health does not depend upon the quantity, as that will be regulated by the appetite, but that it essentially depends on the quality of the sustenance received. During the last 3 months of pregnancy, everything of a heating and indigestible nature ought to be particularly avoided, and such food should be taken as will be productive of a more than usual nourishment and support. These 2 points, then, it will be seen, are necessary to be attended to, viz. 1. To use food as will afford the greatest nourishment. 2. To avoid the use of such food as is of a loading and inflammatory nature. It is not needful for any person strictly to adhere to one particular kind of food, but rather to observe how and when nature dictates the necessary occasional change of aliment. As this address may come into the hands of the poor as well as of persons in higher life, I wish to be very plain, that I may not be misunderstood by any. During my professional engagements in this town, I have been extensively engaged in midwifery, having attended in the 2 first years of my practice upwards of 300 cases. All these females I have directed, when they applied to me, to live on a mild diet before their confinement, such as milk or chocolate to breakfast, broths with a small portion of flesh meat to dinner, and groats boiled in milk to supper. I, at the same time, advise them to avoid all heating wines and spirituous liquors. In consequence of their following these plain rules, I have been so much favored as to have had only one fatal case, which was a case of confirmed consumption before delivery. The broths which I have generally ordered are of the most nutritive kind. On account of their simplicity and cheapness, they can, with the greatest facility, be procured by all degrees of people. The following is the general formula. Take a sheep's head, well cleaned, and boil it on a slow fire for 4 hours with a little parsley, 2 onions, a tablespoon or 2 of pearl barley. Of this, half a pint or upwards ought to be taken 2 or 3 times in a day. This broth may occasionally be changed for beef tea, with a little mace added to it. A small quantity of porter may be taken after dinner. The broth, which I so strongly recommend to all pregnant women previous to delivery and during the month, affords more nourishment than either beef or mutton. It, at the same time, has a tendency to regulate the bowels and to keep the whole frame in a proper temperature. A particular attention to diet in the months of pregnancy will, I am well convinced, be productive of the invaluable blessing of health during that particular period, and will be a further promoter of recovery during confinement. On exercise. A certain degree of exercise is as necessary to the pregnant female for preservative of health as proper food is for the nourishment of her body. Turn your attention for one moment to the laboring part of the community, residing in the country, and you will find them seldom troubled by disease. On the contrary, you will observe that people who do not take exercise are consequently debilitated with universal relaxation. But I must here notice that exercise, when too frequently used, occasions loss of appetite, heat in the bowels, and costiveness. In pregnancy, it should be laid down as a general rule never to walk much with a full stomach, but to take exercise either before dinner or after digestion is finished. On this subject, I think I cannot communicate anything more appropriate than the following experiment, which was made by a gentleman in London. He took 2 spaniels and caused them to be well fed with as much milk and oatmeal as they chose. Immediately after which, one of the dogs was permitted to repose itself by the fire, the other was taken into the fields and hunted 2 hours. When it returned home, they were both ordered to be put to death, which was done accordingly. Their stomachs were then opened, and on examination it was found that, in the stomach of the animal which had been hunted, the food remained in the same state as when at first received, and that the stomach of the other, which had, as nature dictated, reposed itself near the fire, was quite empty, every part of its food being completely digested. I will be bold, therefore, to assert that the most proper time for exercise is in the forenoon, and the pregnant female will do well to indulge herself with 1 hour's rest after the enjoyment of her dinner. On spirituous liquors. Nothing is more destructive to health than spirituous liquors and heating wines used to excess. They are peculiarly injurious to the pregnant female. Instead of being heated and inflamed with wine and spirits, she ought occasionally to take a small quantity of porter or beer, but let her beverage be principally of a milder kind, such as coffee, milk, barley water, etc. Strong spirits and wines were never designed for common use. They were intended, when necessity required them, to be given to strengthen the weak and to refresh the weary. If immoderately used, they have an immediate tendency to inflame the system, to disturb the functions of the living body, and to lay a foundation for those diseases which are too frequently heard of in this luxurious age of the world. The liquors which kind heaven intended should be beneficial to man in the hour of need are daily used by many who are robust and healthy, so that when sickness attacks the subject, these needful cordials have lost their desired effects on him. If it be necessary to take anything after dinner, let me especially advise the pregnant female to indulge herself with a cup of strong coffee, which is much more suitable to her situation and will prove more beneficial to her general health than any kind of wine or spirituous liquors. On the bowels, it is not my intention to give my readers an anatomical description of the viscera, as that would neither answer the end to which I aim, nor tend to profit those whom I am particularly desirous of benefiting. The only subject that I have in view is to induce the female by reasonable arguments to forsake the habits of fashionable life, shun the luxurious table, which produces indolence and late hours, and to court moderate exercise and simple diet, which are preservatives of health. The human frame is an instrument of 10,000 strings, all of which are dependent on each other for the performance of their several functions in the living body. Perhaps there is nothing so complicated and so capable of disordering the whole frame as a negligent inattention to the due and regular evacuation of the intestinal canal. Costiveness in the bowels in infancy, as well as in mature age, is pregnant with disease and general bad health. It is particularly necessary to use the means which are likely to produce a regular evacuation from the bowels, which may be done by perseverance and proper attention. A patient under my care consulted me on the constipation of the bowels, having been subject to the disposition for several years, to which nothing which had been before prescribed had given permanent relief. I therefore advised him to retire before going to his counting house every morning at a convenient hour, and at the same time in the evening, whether he felt any inclination or not. This practice he has ever since persevered in. His general bad health is removed. The evacuation of his bowels is now regular, without the constant use of purgative medicines as formerly. He occasionally takes a little pure castor oil, which is difficult to be obtained genuine. In general, this propensity to costiveness is attendant on the pregnant female, and more particularly during the last 3 months of her state. Coughs, lassitude, and headaches are not unfrequently incident to this state, with difficulty of breathing and pain in the side. All these are frequently the effects of costiveness, which ought particularly to be avoided. Costiveness in this state has many causes. It is often occasioned by the pressure of the womb upon the last portion of the intestines, called the rectum. It is likewise produced by taking improper food. A large collection of feces in the time of delivery frequently renders the labor more tedious and is the general attendant on a bad recovery. Women in this state should never quack themselves with any kind of medicines, nor should they entrust their lives and health into the precarious hands of a medical pretender. Many are the individuals prematurely hurried into the other world by the ignorance of such empirical characters. The bowels in pregnant women ought to be daily relieved by natural evacuations, that your life may be preserved in the hour of sorrow when disease attacks you. Regularly consult your respective surgeons, in whom, under Providence, you intend to place confidence. The conclusion. The immediate connection which subsists between the mind and the body is sufficiently known to everyone. But though so well known, there is not so due a regard paid to this subject as its importance demands. The various passions to which the mind is subject are frequently causes of disease to the body, and at the same time they have a tendency to retard a progressive cure of the disorders already entailed on the patient. Whatever forms these intruders on health may assume, they sometimes are the occasion of sudden death, and not unfrequently they are productive of fits of the epileptic as well as the apoplectic kind. Excessive joy has been known to produce the very worst effects, and to terminate in sudden death, particularly when suddenly imbibed. Anger, that prevailing evil in the breast of man, is a destructive passion when carried to violent excess. It has conquered a great number of useful individuals and prematurely deposited them in the arms of death. Hunter, that brightest ornament of the profession in his day, was fatally and suddenly snatched from his friends and students by the excess of this predominant passion. But fear, of all the passions, may be said, I think, to be the most detrimental. Its baneful influence extends over the whole human body and produces many diseases which are too numerous and complicated to be mentioned in this address. Persons that foolishly run to meeting approaching danger become surrounded with debility, and with a certain relaxation of all functions of the animal economy. In different people, a diversity of effects is produced by this passion. In some subjects, insensible perspiration is impeded, and others, increased perspiration is excited. And sometimes the urinary bladder and the bowels are so much affected as to produce an involuntary evacuation of their contents. Some pregnant females foolishly apprehend their death will take place after delivery. For this conjecture, they have no foundation. While entertaining such an idea without any reason, they imperceptibly cause that debility which unfits them for the approaching hour. I could mention instances of this kind were it needful, which were productive of the worst effects. But a due preparation for that moment which, whenever it arrives, must be decisive to us all, will cause fear to fly far from us, and will enable us to meet the summons for our exit with humble resignation, knowing on whom our hope is placed.